The wind screamed across the plains as if the earth itself were warning her to turn back. It whipped the tall grass into waves that shimmered gold beneath the dying sun, and the world smelled of sage and gunpowder. Clara Whitmore's breath tore ragged from her throat as she ran. Bare feet pounding the dirt road, her once pristine wedding dress torn and heavy with sweat and blood. Every step drove fire deeper into her chest, but still she ran, because behind her thundered hooves, merciless, closing, hunting. The day had begun with church bells, their chimes ringing hollow in the hot air of a Texas afternoon. Inside the small whitewashed chapel, guests fanned themselves and smiled politely while Clara's hands shook at her sides. She had begged her father not to do this, not to bind her life to Henry Caldwell, a man she feared more than rattlesnakes or lightning storms. But her father's eyes had been hard as flint. Land was at stake, honor was at stake, and daughters, in his world, were not meant to choose. Caldwell looked the part of a respectable groom, his black suit pressed, his smile smooth. But Clara had seen what others did not. The cruelty behind his charm, the women who had vanished his wake, the debt settled not with coin but with blood. When the preacher spoke the words, "Until death do you part," Clara felt the truth of it. Death was the only freedom Caldwell would ever grant her. So she ran. In the stunned silence of the chapel, her gown caught on the doorframe, ripping lace and silk as she burst into the sunlight. Behind her came the roar of Caldwell's voice, twisted with rage. Within moments, his men scrambled for their horses. The thunder of pursuit filled the air as she bolted down the dust road, the veil torn from her hair, her heart hammering against her ribs. A crack split the sky. The shot burned through her shoulder, spinning her sideways. She fell hard, the taste of dirt filling her mouth, her scream lost in the roar of hooves. Still, she clawed at the earth, dragging herself off the road and into the scrub. Her fingers left bloody streaks on the dry soil as she stumbled onward, the world tilting, her vision narrowing to a tunnel of light and shadow. The voices grew fainter as she pushed into the wild, her wedding gown shredding on thorns and branches. She tried to move her legs forward, but the blood poured too freely, the pain searing, relentless. Finally her body gave way, and she collapsed among the roots of an old cottonwood, her eyes fluttering closed as darkness swallowed her. She thought that was where she would die, nameless and forgotten, another broken body on the edge of the frontier. But when she woke, she was not dead. Her first sight was firelight, flickering against rough-hewn wooden walls. The second was a man. He sat across from her, his broad frame bent toward the flames, his rifle laid across his knees as if it belonged there. His face was weathered, carved by sun and silence, a beard shadowing his jaw. His eyes, steel blue, piercing, shifted toward her as she stirred. She tried to speak, but her throat was raw, her lips cracked, her shoulders screamed as she moved, and only then did she see the clean bandage wound tied across it. She gasped, confusion and fear twisting together. "You'll live," the man said, his voice low, gravelly, a sound more like a judgment than comfort. It was the only thing he offered. No questions, no demands. She searched his face, desperate for answers. Who was he? Why had he saved her? But he had already turned back to the fire, the shadows hiding his expression. His silence was heavier than words. Through fever and pain, Clara drifted in and out of sleep. She dreamed of Caldwell's face, the fury in his eyes as she fled. She dreamed of her father, cold and unmoved as he handed her away like cattle at market. She dreamed of the bullet tearing into her flesh, of the earth rushing up to swallow her whole. Each time she woke, the stranger was still there, silent, unyielding, watching the fire or whittling with slow, precise strokes. She learned his name not from him, but from whispers in her half-conscious haze. Jonah Callahan, a drifter. Some called him dangerous. Others said he had lost everything once and walked away from the ruins. Clara did not know which was true. He offered no stories, no explanations. He only sat in that silence, as if words were luxuries long ago abandoned. The cabin smelled of smoke and pine, the walls lined with tools, worn saddles, and the weight of solitude. Clara began to realize this man had lived here alone, and alone by choice. Yet he had carried her here, cleaned her wound, kept her alive without asking a single question. The nights were hardest, when the wind rattled the shutters and coyotes howled across the plains. Clara's dreams dragged her back into the dirt road, into the terror of being hunted. More than once she woke crying out, clutching her shoulder as if the bullet were still inside her. Each time, Jonah's shadow loomed by the fire, his rifle in hand, his gaze fixed on the darkness outside. He did not speak, did not comfort her with hollow promises, but somehow his steady presence was enough. Days blurred together. Her strength returned in small measures. She could sit, then stand, then step out into the sharp air of the woods that surrounded the cabin. The wilderness felt endless, alive with secrets. The creek nearby sang with cold water, and the wind carried the scent of earth and pine needles. For the first time since she had fled, Clara breathed without chains on her chest. But freedom was fragile. One afternoon, as she stepped into the clearing, she froze at a sound low and rumbling. From the trees, a wolf emerged, lean and desperate, its yellow eyes locked on her. It crept forward, lips peeled back, teeth bared. Clara's pulse thundered. She tried to step back, but her legs trembled. The wolf crouched lower, ready to spring. The crack of a rifle shattered the air. The wolf dropped lifeless at her feet. Clara spun, her chest heaving. Jonah stood behind her, rifle still smoking, his expression unreadable. His eyes met hers for a moment, and in them she saw no triumph, no expectation. Only the inevitability of a man who had killed before and would kill again to survive. That night by the fire, Clara finally whispered a question that burned inside her. Why? Why are you helping me? Jonah didn't look up from the wood he was carving. His hand paused just slightly, and his voice was quiet when he answered. Don't need a reason. But Clara saw it anyway. The flicker in his eyes, the shadow on his face. This man carried his own ghosts. And perhaps, in saving her, he was trying to silence them. For the first time since she had fled, Clara felt something stir within her. Not love, not hope, something simpler. The sense that she might live to see another dawn. But deep in her bones, she knew the men who hunted her would not stop until blood was spilled. And if they came here, the silence of Jonah Callahan's cabin would be broken by gunfire. The days settled into a rhythm Clara could almost mistake for peace, though she knew peace was a fragile thing on this land. The morning began with the scrape of steel on flint, the spark snapping into flame, the kettle placed over fire. Jonah moved with the same precision each day, his boots soft on the floorboards, his hat pulled low when he stepped outside to split wood. He was a man built of silence, and that silence pressed against her at first, thick as stone. But slowly, Clara began to see it was not the silence of cruelty or indifference. It was the silence of a man who had seen enough grief to know that words couldn't always mend. Clara's shoulder healed by degrees, the ache becoming part of her body rather than something that consumed it. She tested her strength by walking circles around the cabin, then following the creek down to where its silver current twisted through the pines. The world outside smelled sharp and alive, like pine needles crushed underfoot and soil turned damp by morning frost. She had never known the land could sing like that, quiet and fierce. And yet, the silence was never truly hers. When she turned, Jonah would often be there, not intruding, but watchful. His rifle was rarely out of reach. Sometimes he whittled a piece of wood while she walked, his knife flashing in and out of the grain. Sometimes he stood at the edge of the clearing, scanning the horizon as though the land itself whispered threats only he could hear. He did not follow her like a guard. He anchored her like a shadow. At night, the dreams came back. She woke choking on the memory of hooves and dust, of Caldwell's men laughing as they rode her down. Her hand flew to her scar, her body trembling so violently she thought she might shatter. Each time she opened her eyes, Jonah was awake too, sitting in the firelight. He did not ask what haunted her. He did not comfort her with lies. But he was there, and sometimes that was enough. One evening a storm broke across the plains, heavy and furious. Rain lashed the roof until it sang like drums. Lightning split the sky into raw veins of light, and thunder rolled like cannon fire. Clara huddled near the hearth, flinching at each crash. Jonah stood in the doorway, hat brim pulled low, watching the tree line with his rifle resting casually in his hands. The storm seemed to him no more threatening than a passing stranger. Clara's breath trembled as she whispered into the roar, "They'll come for me. He'll come." Jonah turned his head, his profile lit sharp by firelight. "Then we'll be ready." It was the first time he had said, "we." The word steadied something in her chest she hadn't realized was shaking. The wilderness tested her the next morning. She stepped down to the creek to draw water, crouching low, feeling proud of the steadiness of her hand. Then came a growl, low and ragged. She turned to see a wolf, ribs showing, its yellow eyes locked on her. It crouched, lips peeled back from hungry teeth. Clara froze, heart thundering. Before she could scream, a rifle cracked. The wolf collapsed in the dirt, lifeless. Clara spun, breath ragged, and saw Jonah lowering his rifle, smoke curling from a barrel. He did not speak, did not even look at the carcass. His eyes met hers instead, steady, unreadable. In them was no gloating, no need for thanks, only the simple fact that he had acted and she had lived. That night, Clara couldn't stop herself. Staring into the fire, she asked, "Why? Why are you helping me?" Jonah's knife paused against the wood he carved. His face remained in shadow, but his voice came steady and low. "Don't need a reason." But she caught the flicker in his eyes, the pause in his hand. There was pain there, buried deep. He carried ghosts, same as she did. And maybe, she thought, saving her was the only way he knew to silence them. The days that followed stretched taut with a kind of waiting she couldn't name. Jonah began showing her small things. Where to step on shale so it didn't slip under her, how to read tracks in the dirt, how to hold a revolver he pressed into her hands one morning. "Breath out," he said quietly, his voice almost softer than the wind. "Then squeeze. Don't jerk." She missed the first shot. The second, too. Her hands trembled, and her stomach churned with shame. Jonah didn't scold. He didn't comfort. He just set another can on the stump. Again. On the fifth try, the can leapt into the air and clattered into the dirt. Clara's chest swelled with something she hadn't felt in weeks, something like pride. Jonah gave no smile, no nod, but his eyes softened, and that was enough. She began to notice how trust grew between them not in words, but in actions. When he left for traps, she kept the fire alive. When he returned, she'd stitched another tear in her dress with clumsy but stubborn hands. He checked the fence line, and she checked the creek. No one said thank you, but every unspoken gesture was a tally. Proof that neither was alone anymore. Then, one morning, Clara saw it. Smoke on the horizon, not from storm, not from hearth, but from riders. The color drained from her face. "They found me," she whispered. Jonah followed her gaze, his jaw tightening. He did not ask who. He did not ask why. He simply loaded his rifle with calm precision, the click of metal loud in silence. "You don't understand," Clara stammered. "Caldwell, he won't stop. He'll burn everything, kill anyone." Jonah's voice cut her off, steady and iron. "I understand." He glanced once toward the rising dust cloud, then back to her. "And I ain't running." The word struck her like a hammer. For so long she had run, from Caldwell, from her father's betrayal, from the weight of her own fear. But this man, who owed her nothing, would stand. Not for duty, not for land, not for money. Simply because he had decided to. That night the three of them, Clara, Jonah, and the silence they shared, sat by the fire. Jonah oiled his rifle, his hand steady. Clara cradled the revolver, her fingers tracing the worn grip, her pulse leaping at the thought of what lay ahead. She didn't know if she could kill again, if she could aim steady when Caldwell's eyes burned into her, but she knew she would not run. The land outside held its breath. Coyotes hushed. The wind stilled. Even the creek seemed to soften its song. The horizon glowed with dust and smoke, and in her chest Clara felt the heavy, unshakable truth. The storm was coming, and she would face it. The dawn came raw and pale, a sheet of silver laid over the land. Smoke drifted from the canyon where bodies had cooled in the night, and the creek whispered through stones as though nothing had happened at all. Clara sat on the rock shelf with the revolver still heavy in her hand, her ears ringing from echoes that hadn't left with the dark. Jonah stood nearby, quiet as ever, but his rifle was across his knees, and his eyes never left the horizon. Naya appeared at first light, stepping from the brush with the ease of someone who belonged to shadows. She crouched by the creek, cleaned her blade, and said, "Scouts will take word back. He'll ride before long." Clara's stomach twisted, but her voice was steadier than she felt. "Then we finish it." Jonah's gaze flicked toward her, not surprised, not disapproving, just measuring. "You got iron in you," he said simply. "Question is, can you carry it when it gets heavy?" The hours that followed dragged, long and brittle. They rebuilt what they could, reset traps, laid brush across the cabin path to slow a charge, marked sight lines from the rocks above. Jonah moved with an economy of motion, as though he'd walked this road 100 times before. Naya ranged the ridges, her bow slung across her back, her steps soundless on pine needles. Clara forced her hands to still their tremor as she cleaned the revolver, checked each chamber, practiced loading until the rhythm was muscle and not thought. By afternoon, the horizon burned with dust. A line of riders rose from the plains, shimmering in the heat like a mirage. Clara's breath hitched. At their center rode Henry Caldwell himself, his black coat whipping in the wind, his posture straight-backed and furious. He had come, as promised, and he had brought hell with him. Jonah's voice cut through the hush. 20, maybe more. Too many for a stand at the cut. We hold the ridge. Make them come uphill. They took their places as the riders fanned out below, Caldwell's voice carrying clear across the flats. "Clara!" he roared, his words sharp as whips. "You think you can shame me? You think you can steal my name and live? Come down and beg, and maybe I'll end it quick." Clara felt fire rise in her throat. For months she had been nothing more than a pawn on a ledger. For weeks she had been hunted like prey. And now, with Jonah steady at her side and Naya's eyes sharp as flint in the shadows, she found her voice. "You'll never own me," she shouted back, her words cracking the silence. "Not my name, not my breath, not my life." The men jeered, spurred their horses. Caldwell lifted his hand. "Burn it," he commanded. Torches flew. Flames licked at the cabin roof. Hungry and fast. Smoke billowed black against the pale sky. Jonah didn't flinch, only raised his rifle and fired. A rider toppled. Naya's arrow followed, pinning another to his saddle. Clara felt her lungs seize, but she forced her breath out slow, lined the revolver on a figure rushing uphill and squeezed. The man spun, fell and didn't rise. The ridge erupted. Gunfire cracked, arrows hissed. The smell of powder and smoke thickened until the air itself burned. Horses screamed, men shouted curses, and the flames roared louder as the cabin became a pyre. Clara crouched behind the rocks, reloading with shaking hands, her ears filled with a storm of sound. Jonah moved like a machine, calm, deliberate, every shot precise. Naya's silhouette darted between trees, her bow singing in the chaos. Still, there were too many. The riders pressed closer, clawing up the ridge with sheer fury. Bullets bit the stone at Clara's side, one grazing her sleeve. She gasped, scrambled, nearly dropped the revolver, but Jonah's hand steadied her shoulder just long enough for her to breathe again. "Don't stop," he said, his voice iron. She didn't. The fight stretched like a lifetime. Men fell. Horses scattered. The ridge ran red with blood and ash. At last, as the smoke thinned, only Caldwell remained. He dismounted slowly, deliberately, his black coat swirling like a vulture's wings. He held his pistol low, his eyes locked on Clara. "You've cost me men," he spat. "You've cost me land. But you'll cost me no more." Jonah stepped forward, rifle raised. Caldwell sneered. "Stand aside, drifter. She's mine." For the first time, Jonah spoke more than a sentence. "She's her own." His tone left no room for argument. Caldwell's face twisted and he fired. Jonah staggered, the bullet grazing his side, blood soaking his shirt. Clara screamed, but Jonah did not fall. He leveled his rifle and pulled the trigger. Caldwell dealt aside, the shot grazing his arm. Both men reloaded in frantic silence. Steel clashing against steel. Clara's heart pounded. She saw Jonah bleeding, Caldwell's eyes burning, and she knew this moment was hers as much as theirs. With trembling hands, she raised a revolver. Caldwell turned toward her, lips curling. "You wouldn't," he hissed. "You're just a girl in lace." She squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked. Caldwell's eyes widened, then his body crumpled into the dust. The silence that followed was heavier than any gunfire. Clara lowered the revolver, her hands shaking violently now that it was done. Jonah staggered, but Nye was already at his side, pressing cloth to the wound, her movements brisk and sure. Clara dropped to her knees beside them, tears streaking her face, smoke curling around them from the burning cabin below. It was over. The ridge stank of powder and blood. The cabin was ash. The plain stretched quiet once more, as though the land itself had swallowed the violence whole. Nye tied Jonah aside with practiced skill, muttering, "He'll live, if he lets himself." Clara looked at him, at the man who had carried her from death's door, who had never asked her name, who had fought not because he had to, but because he chose to. Their eyes met. No words passed, but the silence between them was thick with everything they couldn't say. Days later, when the smoke cleared and the ridge grew quiet again, Clara stood at the edge of the plains. The sun was rising, painting the sky in bands of gold. Jonah was mending what little remained of the cabin. Naya had vanished back into the ridges, her figure swallowed by trees and shadows, leaving only the faint trace of her presence behind. Clara knew she couldn't stay. She had a choice now, for the first time in her life, and it lay beyond the horizon. But as she turned to go, Jonah looked up from his work. For a heartbeat, their gazes held. No promises, no demands. Just the truth of two souls who had met in fire and silence. She touched the revolver at her hip, her scar aching faintly beneath her dress. Then she walked away into the morning light, each step carrying her farther from the girl who had run from the chapel, closer to the woman who had taken her freedom with blood and iron. Jonah watched her until the land swallowed her figure, then turned back to his tools. The cabin would rise again. The ghost would remain. But in the silence, there was also something new, a memory of fire and lace and a kind of defiance that does not fade. And the land, as always, endured,